Remembering the first time we felt beautiful isn't as simple as it seems. Maybe because for many of us, that feeling never came naturally. She, still a little girl, would spend hours alone in her room, playing at being what she saw in the world. There was an old dresser there, with a mirror already yellowed with time. The mirror said nothing. It merely reflected what stood before it. But she didn't know yet. She hadn't even suspected the weight a reflection could carry. She clearly remembered the scent of talcum powder in the air and her mother's voice coming from the kitchen. Her hair was dark, far too curly for the standards of the dolls parading on TV. Her skin, brown and glowing, didn't match the polished magazine covers in the living room. At 6 years old, perched on a stool to reach the mirror, she smiled without hesitation, showed her gapped little teeth, made funny faces, mimicked the poses of the pop stars from her school notebooks. There was no criticism in that gaze yet, only playfulness and curiosity. Until one day, without meaning to, she overheard a neighbor say to her mom, "She's smart, right? Because pretty, she's gonna have to work on that." It was a light comment, almost a joke, but it dropped like a stone into a small chest that only wanted to be seen with affection. In that instant, for the first time, she looked at the mirror and didn't know what to see. What had once been fun turned into a puzzle. Was her nose too big? Her eyes too plain? Her mouth all wrong? She began searching her own face for what might be missing to be called beautiful. Little by little, the mirror became a judge. What had once been light became labor. She began comparing herself to other girls, tried to smile like the pop stars on TV, brushed her hair until her scalp hurt, but nothing ever seemed enough. At school, the comments came in droves. "Your hair is funny," they said. "You have a strong face," as if it were a flaw. She learned to hide, tied her curls back, avoided photos, lowered her gaze in the hallways, always feeling like she was almost, but never quite, enough. And still, in silence, she waited, like someone sitting on the curb, watching the end of the street, hoping someone would appear. She waited for the day she would look in the mirror and see beauty. Not the beauty others pointed out, but the kind she could call her own. Adolescence arrived like a shattered mirror, returning disconnected pieces of the person she tried, with effort, to become. There was something cruel in how the world suddenly demanded beauty. But not just any beauty. A specific, nearly impossible version that screamed from screens, whispered from magazines, and dripped from lips in subtle tones. It was then, in that awkward stage between a changing body and a retreating soul, that she learned to reshape herself. She straightened her hair, hid her curves, silenced her feelings. Every gesture became calculated. Every photo demanded approval. Every outfit was chosen to please eyes that maybe weren't even looking. And even after all that effort, she never felt enough. There was always something to fix. Her nose, her posture, her skin tone, even the way she laughed. That stage of life, once promised to be full of discovery, turned into a long act of disguises. Time passed. High school faded. So did the classmates. And for a moment, she believed adulthood would bring relief, that freedom would come with independence. But it didn't. The childhood mirror gave way to store windows, curated selfies, and cold webcams in online meetings. The judgment was quieter, now, but still sharp. At 28, living in a new city, with a solid career and confident strides through office hallways, she still found herself each morning in front of the mirror, asking, "Am I beautiful enough today?" It was different. Yes, no longer a desperate quest for teenage approval, but a constant fear of becoming invisible, or of being seen the wrong way. At work, she was admired for her competence. and that, of course, mattered. But at the same time, she felt she had to prove herself twice as much. Looking flawless wasn't a choice. It was a need. And sometimes, it hurt. There were days she looked at herself in the elevator mirror and wished she could disappear. Days she got fully dressed just so she wouldn't look exhausted. Days she rehearsed, smiles in the mirror like preparing for a role. Even with all her achievements, something inside her was still hostage to an image that refused to be complete. But there was a difference now. Small, almost imperceptible, but real. She began to wonder. For the first time, the question wasn't, am I beautiful enough? But, who am I trying to be beautiful for? It was just a whisper. But it sounded like freedom, a beginning, a breeze in a room that had always been locked. It was just an ordinary morning. One of those that starts with lukewarm coffee, phone notifications, and urgency in the eyes. She was on the subway, surrounded by strangers in a rush, when something unusual happened. Sitting across from her was an older woman. A lady with skin mapped by time, and white hair pulled back with ceremonial care. There was serenity in her gaze. She wore a simple blouse, but something in her posture stood out. A lightness of someone who carries the world without making noise. They exchanged glances for a moment, one of those seconds that last longer than it should. And in that firm, calm, story-filled gaze, something cut through the fogged subway window, cut through the layers she still wore for protection. Then she saw herself in the reflection, next to that woman. Two silhouettes separated by decades, and something even deeper, how they saw themselves. For a brief moment, she saw herself through the other woman's eyes, not as someone trying to fit in, but as someone whole, a woman who no longer needed to prove anything, not to the mirror, not to anyone. The image lasted only a second, but long enough to awaken something she didn't know had been asleep. Later, passing by a store window, she stopped without thinking, just looked at herself, and for the first time in a long time, she didn't try to fix anything, didn't adjust her hair, didn't hide her fatigue, just faced herself. The woman reflected there was the same as always. Brown eyes, dark wavy hair, a beauty serene and effortless. But something in her gaze was new, like a question slowly forming. What if I didn't need approval to be beautiful? That night, she sat in front of her bedroom mirror. No makeup, no filters, just her. She remembered her childhood, the first judgments, the masks of adolescence, the days when being a woman seemed to require constant resistance. And in that silent pause, she understood what the subway woman had shown her, without saying a word. Maybe beauty didn't live in the shape of her face, or in store-bought products, or in suffocating comparisons. Maybe it had been hiding elsewhere all along, in presence, in the gaze of someone who accepts herself whole, in the lightness of someone who doesn't carve herself to fit, in the truth of someone who knows, finally, that beauty had always been there. She had only needed permission to see it. The mirror in her room had always been a faithful companion, sometimes an accomplice, sometimes a judge. But that day, it was simply quiet. No accusations, no corrections, just a reflection. There she was. Her face, now marked by time and subtle lines. Her posture, less rigid. Her smile, freer. She had always thought the day she'd feel truly beautiful would be marked by grand gestures, a makeover, a new outfit, maybe a glow-up captured in perfect lighting. But it came on a normal day, with no makeup, with hair out of place, wearing clothes chosen more for comfort than elegance. And for the first time, that was enough. It wasn't about giving up. It was about reclaiming the right to look at herself with gentleness, to not seek in the mirror an enemy, to not base her worth on other people's approval. There was no miracle, no epiphany, just a soft realization. She didn't need to fit in to feel whole. She didn't need to shrink herself to belong. She didn't need to constantly be working on herself to be worthy. She sat on the bed and smiled, a small, genuine smile. It wasn't pride, it was peace. The kind of peace that comes when you stop running from yourself. She looked once more into the mirror and said, almost in a whisper, "You're enough. Not perfect, not flawless, not what the world demands, but whole, real, beautiful in the truth of simply being." Something strange happens when we stop judging ourselves so harshly. We begin to see others with new eyes. It was at a cafe, one of those late afternoons filled with people in a hurry and the smell of fresh bread, that she noticed a young woman sitting alone at the next table. She was taking selfies and deleting them one by one, looking frustrated. There was nothing strange about that. She herself had done the same many times. But this time, watching from outside the loop of self-criticism, something moved inside her. She wanted to say to the girl, "You're beautiful. Don't delete yourself like that." Of course, she didn't say anything, but she carried that scene with her all day. That was when she began to truly see. To see how many women walked the streets shrinking themselves. How many pulled at their clothes to hide their bodies. How many laughed with a hand over their mouth. How many erased themselves, bit by bit, to fit into some mold no one ever really defined. And suddenly, everything made sense. That's why she had suffered so much. That's why so many suffer. Because we were taught to doubt ourselves, to compete instead of support, to chase unattainable ideals while we overlook our own brilliance. So she made a promise. From that day on, every time she looked at another woman, she would look with compassion, not judgment, not comparison, but sisterhood. And slowly, she realized she was no longer alone, because every time she exchanged a knowing smile with a stranger, every time she complimented a friend's natural hair, or cheered for a woman who dared to take up space unapologetically, she was helping to build something new, a world where mirrors didn't divide, but reflected a shared strength, one that said, without needing to shout, "We are enough, just as we are." She had always been the discreet type, the one who spoke little, nodded in meetings, and chose silence over confrontation, especially when it came to her appearance. There were things she thought but never dared to say, until that day. It was a family lunch, those gatherings where everyone talks over each other and old habits take the stage. Her aunt, with the best of intentions, said, "You'd be even more beautiful if you lost a few pounds." And the room went quiet for a second, as if waiting for the usual awkward chuckle or for her to brush it off. But something had changed, not out of anger, not out of hurt, but out of truth. She calmly replied, "I'm already beautiful, not even more, just as I am." The table fell into silence. Then came the murmurs, the looks, the raised eyebrows. But she didn't shrink, didn't try to explain herself, didn't ask for validation. She just continued eating, feeling her body whole, not as an object to be judged, but as a house she finally felt at home in. That day marked something new, because once we speak our truth out loud, there's no going back. It echoes inside us in a way that no one can erase. It wasn't just a sentence. It was a declaration of beauty, of self-respect, freedom. The mirror was still there. Same frame, same glass. But it no longer had the last word. She still had days when she felt off, when clothes didn't fit right, when her hair seemed to have a mind of its own. But those days no longer defined her. Because beauty, she had learned, doesn't live in the reflection. It lives in presence, in how she walks into a room, in how she treats herself when no one is watching, in how she stands tall, even when she's tired. The mirror had once been a judge, then a neutral witness. Now, it was just an object. Her beauty no longer depended on it, because it had moved to her voice, her choices, her gaze when she looked at other women without comparing, without competing, without diminishing herself. She didn't always feel radiant, and that was okay, because she no longer chased constant perfection. She chose truth. And the truth was, she was beautiful, even when no one said so, even when no one saw, even when the world insisted otherwise, because now she saw. And that, finally, was enough. She once believed she had inherited everything from her mother: the shape of her eyes, the curve of her hips, the insecurity in front of the mirror. She remembered her mother sucking in her stomach every time she walked past a mirror, putting on makeup even when she was sad, saying I'm going on a diet more often than I'm proud of myself. That pain wasn't just hers. It was passed down like an old necklace, worn by generations. But she didn't want to pass it on. If one day she had a daughter, a niece, or even just the chance to influence another girl, she didn't want to offer the same legacy. She wanted her to know she could wear what she liked, laugh loudly, take up space, that her body wasn't the price she had to pay to be accepted. That beauty is not a goal. It's a way of existing with truth. So she started the break. She stopped criticizing herself out loud. She stopped praising others only when they looked slim or put together. She stopped pretending beauty meant suffering. She didn't know what kind of mirror the next generations would face, but she knew that if she could help them see themselves with tenderness, without needing to earn love through appearance, then maybe the chain would finally break. Some inherit silver, others inherit silence. She chose to leave behind freedom. For a long time, she had chased a beauty she couldn't even describe. It was always out there, on someone else's face, in someone else's body. Always distant, always unreachable, until she stopped looking outward and started looking inward. What did she like? What made her feel good? What if beauty wasn't about admiration, but about authenticity? She realized she felt most beautiful when she danced alone in the living room, when she wore clothes that hugged her body with softness, when she said no without guilt and yes without fear. Beauty stopped being a performance. It became presence, intention, a choice. And she stopped asking, "Am I beautiful enough?" Instead, she asked, "Am I honoring who I am today?" She started defining her own standard, one that didn't depend on trends, filters, or other people's applause. Her standard became joy, peace, freedom. And in that, she was stunning.